Good afternoon. I'm Ivo Cré from Polis, a network of cities and regions working on transport innovation. We'll talk this afternoon about urban vehicle access regulations, how to be more efficient and effective. And we take a little sidestep also in the world of intelligent speed assistance, but you will see how that fits to our story of the next hour. This webinar is organized in cooperation with Reveal and Horizon 2020 project, and also with the Interreg Central Europe Dynaxibility Capitalization Action. Just that you are aware, this meeting is recorded. That has the advantage that you can also check out the content later after the webinar. It will be published on YouTube and on the Polis website. The IDs, and that's the last reminder for the speakers in the panel to stay muted when you are not speaking. And for all the participants, please use the chat as well as the Q&A function to share your views and to ask questions to the panel. I will be monitoring both of them to make sure that we don't lose any of your questions, which then can be answered either in writing or or orally by the speakers. This webinar is part of a series of webinars, a series we have called Mobilizing Mobility. Polis is active in several EU research projects and EU capitalization projects under Interreg. And we are trying to turn the innovation that is developed in these projects into local action, also linking these stories to local practices in our membership. And we have these webinars twice a week. As you can see on this list, we had a busy month of October already, and we will continue later this week with a webinar on mobility as a service, and specifically Civitas experiences in that regard. But today we focus on urban vehicle access regulations. And I want to share a couple of thoughts about that before we start the discussions and the presentations. I think the discussion we have today in the webinar goes together or is part of a bigger story about the role of vehicles in our cities, but also the kind of vehicles we want to have in our society, on our continent. And we are, the story we try to write in cities about which vehicle and how many vehicles can enter cities is also set in that bigger picture, in that bigger story. A story that starts at the level of the EU. Which vehicles do we want for the EU, where there is a discussion about industrial policy with activities taken on batteries, and an issue of global competitiveness of our automotive sector, where there are where there has been EU legislation decided upon on energy efficiency of vehicles, but also on safety and safety weights and dimensions of these vehicles, with, for instance, the commitment to deploy ISA in the next years, intelligent speed assistance. There's also the level of member states that comes into view, with several member states that have been giving really strong declarations and creating a vision for electromobility in the next years or in the next decades. And then there is the city level, where cities are also deciding which vehicles can enter cities at which time of day, but also how many vehicles can enter cities, with the different measures that you see also described here. And the discussion goes even deeper or more detailed, where cities also discuss or try to build measures that decide which vehicles can actually be in very specific locations in the city, at a specific charging point, or at a specific parking spot, or an loading bay when it comes to freight, or also where you can decide at which speed or with vehicle characteristics, like which propulsion that is activated in a hybrid vehicle at a certain location or in a certain zone. So these are all questions that come together in the city, that are decided by local authorities, and that are further developed in the projects that we'll present later in this hour of discussion. Digging into the history of what Polis has written about access regulations, I came across an older slide. It seems like an eternity when I saw the slide. It's a slide that was written 2017, 2018, where we were discussing with the European Commission, or explaining to the European Commission, that we think that on this topic of access regulations, there is a whole portfolio of activities they can undertake in view of soft policy, because we are a bit, as a network, we are a bit reluctant to enter into a legislative process on urban vehicle access regulations. And the items that we proposed at that moment was, for instance, to get digital data about access regulations into the national access points that are defined in the ITS directive, where each member state has to build a platform for open data, open mobility data. And this is actually something that will be presented later this hour, where there is currently a tender running that seeks to provide tools to cities and regions to actually publish UVAR data towards the national access points. We also were expressing our hope that there can be new research on urban vehicle access regulations, because at the moment at that moment it was a while that there had been European research on access regulations, and we will hear from Reveal, a project under Horizon 2020 that is doing this undertaking this exact activity. And we are also hoping at that time that future developments can be taken on board when talking about intelligent speed, when talking about UVARs. And we'll hear also from projects like Dynaxibility, and also again from Reveal, how they are trying to fit access regulations to new developments, and give these instruments a new scope and a new purpose. So these are our distinguished speakers. Several colleagues of mine, Maria José Rojo from Polis will talk about Reveal, and Niklas Schamlholz will talk about Dynaxibility. Giacomo Lozzi, our urban freight guy in the office, will talk about best practices and guidance on zero emission zones for urban freight. And then after I have given a very short introduction to a project called UVARBOX, Matthieu, Graindorge and Steven Herskamp, from both connected to the Reveal test site in Helmond, will talk about their experiences. So we have a busy time ahead, and I've talked already far too long. You can engage, as I said before, in the Q&A or in the chat, but you can also tweet all the way this afternoon and later, mentioning our accounts, so that the discussion is also continuing in the tweetosphere, if that's an actual word. But enough said by me. I move to Maria, who will talk about Reveal and how Reveal is trying to look into transitions that influence and shape urban vehicle access regulations. Maria, the
Thank
floor
you,
is
Ivo.
yours. I will disappear.
Thank you. Can you give me the permission? Yes, now I have the permission. So, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can see my screen. Today I have the pleasure to present this project, Reveal project, as Ivo has introduced it already. And I will start by sharing what was our elevator pitch when we started the project about around 1 year ago. Reveal will help cities transform their urban landscapes, and cities will become more livable and by encouraging sustainable transport choices and ultimately creating a healthier and more attractive urban space for every member of society. So that's our aim, and we aimed at doing so by bringing urban vehicle access regulations on the European agenda as an effective and inevitable pillar of the urban mobility transition. Here you can see the definition of that we are using for urban vehicle access regulations, but Ivo has already spoke a bit about this, but this is part of a glossary we have on our webpage, which I also recommend you to take a look. We're collecting different concepts related to UVARs. But yes, we are looking at measures to regulate vehicular access to the urban infrastructure. And at a more conceptual level, UVARs regulate under what conditions certain vehicles are allowed to certain parts of the cities. So we have seen that this is a trend that is increasing. The implementation of UVARs. Currently, there are in Europe, we find over 700 UVARs across 24 European countries. The reason for implementing these UVARs is diverse. In some cases, it's for improving air quality so as to achieve our targets, but also for reducing congestion, for increasing safety, increasing livability, and other reasons. We know there's a diversity of measures. We are familiar with low emission zones, congestion charges, but super blocks as well. But there are also smaller measures like school streets or spatial interventions that can also be considered as UVARs. And indeed, this is a growing trend, and it provokes mixed feelings, because while cities can perceive these measures as useful tools to achieve their targets, there are other stakeholders that sometimes perceive them as having the potential to restrict or limit their activities. And in addition to this, sometimes it's hard for cities to implement an UVAR successfully, and there are many doubts sometimes arise in this process. Some cities, well, we have access to many both successful and not successful examples, and some cities decide to replicate UVAR best practices that were successful elsewhere in the hope of succeeding in their own implementation. But we have seen also that this does not always work. Just to illustrate very briefly, we have, for example, these two congestion charges that were implemented in Sweden, in Stockholm and Gothenburg. Under Stockholm, which was introduced in 2006, reached a public acceptance of around 70%, whilst the one in Gothenburg, which was introduced in 2013, only reached a public acceptance of around 50%. And with this example, we want to illustrate like same measure that is implemented in cities with a very similar social, legal, and cultural backgrounds has different results. That's why we say that devil is in the details, and that it's important to understand which factors are operating. So we have intrinsic factors of the cities, are factors that are intrinsic to the measures, and it's necessary to understand them in order to implement measures that UVARs that are most successful. And this is exactly what the UVAR project, the Reveal project, aims at, to create tools to support a systematic and coordinated way to develop best practices, to bring innovation with regards to governance, to highlight the different UVAR technologies and services that are available, to provide a better understanding of how to look at user needs and acceptance, and to structure the way in which the mobility systems accompanying UVARs should be approached, and also ways to future-proof these UVARs. The methodology, as mentioned, this is an action research project. It combines desk research on the international good practices with empirical data and expert knowledge, with on-the-field testing in our 6 pilots. We'll hear from them after, and through impact assessment and process evaluation. And all these to provide tailored UVAR support and guidance for cities. We will take a look at how we have built our UVAR transition framework, which is the first stage in our methodology. So with this framework, what we want to do is break up the puzzle. So within the UVARs, we have identified 4, we call them measure areas, which are zero emission zones, spatial interventions, pricing measures, and future options. And within these measure field areas, we also find different, we call them super blocks, which are smaller parts that can be, are part of the strategies and come together to build the UVAR itself. And on top of these building blocks, we also have complementary measures, which act like a kind of glue to bring together the whole strategy. So we have been working in developing this categorization, and we also see the implementation of the UVAR as a process. We look at the whole life cycle, starting from the ideation of the UVAR into the design, the implementation, and the operation of the UVAR, across the different stages, across the different the decision-making, the adoption, and the commissioning. And we look at this process, at this life cycle, through the lenses of our 4 transition areas, which are governance and financing, user needs and acceptance, mobility concepts, and system design. I will also give an overview of the UVAR options we're looking at. For that, we're building a database looking at the examples provided by 8 cities, which are Barcelona, Bologna, La Rochelle, Amsterdam, London, Ghent, Milan, and Mechelen. And here we can illustrate, for example, when we look at the circulation plan of the city of Ghent, how the strategy is built by several building blocks within the different categories. For example, it includes roadblocks as traffic filter, which are spatial intervention, but also an update in parking scheme and some complementary measures such as pedestrian bus. And we also see at the process of the implementation of this scheme along or over the time, looking at the whole process and looking at the events that are key in the process of the circulation plan of the city of Ghent, which are related to the different transition areas which I was mentioning before. And this gives us an overview and an understanding of the whole process. Of course, as I mentioned before, we are also working on the field, implementing measures in our pilot cities. We have Helmond, which will come later in today to tell us about their speed adaptation. They're also implementing a zero emission zone. We have Vitoria-Gasteiz implementing super blocks, London, a zero emission zone, Bielefeld, which is implementing a spatial intervention, Jerusalem and its low emission zone, and Padova, implementing a limited traffic zone and a super block. So we have a variety of kinds of measures which we are implementing on the field during the project's lifetime. And all these, we are also building the reveal evaluation framework, which aims to monitor the work process, providing both quantitative and qualitative data as a basis for a comprehensive evaluation of the measures, to detect patterns and to draw empirically founded conclusions, to identify transferable lessons about good practices, and also maybe about issues to avoid, and to issue recommendations for practitioners and policymakers. So this is the reveal methodology, as I mentioned, building the transition framework and change management, reviewing a wide variety of UVAR options and building scenarios, learning by example from our pilot implementation and testing, and all this done through an impact assessment that allows us to learn about the impacts that these UVARs are having in the cities where they're implemented, all to provide for tailored UVAR support tools and guidance for cities. And so far, as I mentioned before, the project has run for a bit more than a year, but we have already some results that are all available in our website. You can, of course, consult them. We have been breaking up measures into a UVAR menu list of 68 measure building blocks over 8 categories. We have been describing the impacts in its different aspects in the 41 aspect indicators over 7 clusters. We have also learned about future-proofing measures against 13 classes of trends and future technologies. And we are also describing the transition of cities from idea to operation by managing governance, user needs, technology, and mobility services. So this is our consortium. The University of Ghent has been leading on the development of the transition framework, which I was just mentioning. This is our whole partnership. And thank you very much for listening. And I welcome the next speakers and also Helmond, who will tell us more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Maria. A very clear and concise presentation of a vast labor that has been undertaken and will be undertaken. The questions that are coming to us is that the link doesn't work for Civitas that you gave for the review website. So maybe post it in the chat again, Maria, so that it's clear where people can find the information. And also, I want to say that the slides will be shared afterwards. So that's that will be definitely be taken care of. So we'll return to the speakers in the panel afterwards. So post your questions in the chat and in the Q&A. As you have heard from Maria, the conditions in which UVARs are being implemented are changing. I mean, that is why Reveal is working with these transition areas, trying to understand how public acceptance and user needs are changing, how different technologies or changing technologies will change the way we work with access regulations, for instance. My colleague Niklas Schamlholz is also engaging in such a process, trying to understand how the context conditions in Central Eastern Europe actually determine the nature of access regulations in that area, and that he does that in the framework of the Dynaxibility project, a capitalization action under Interreg Central Europe. So Niklas, the floor is yours to explain where you are with that project at this moment.
So I think you can see my screen. That should be okay. I would like to introduce you to Dynaxibility, a very special project because it has a very special name, because it's a combination of dynamic and flexibility and Central Europe. So this great project, which is apparently very difficult to write and to spell out, has the aim to shift the policy from car to a more citizen-centric approach. And the Central Europe component is actually quite essential, because in comparison to Northern Europe, for example, what we have seen from my colleague Maria with the example of Stockholm and Gothenburg, and also the other UVAR examples, are mostly in the West, and Central Europe is not lagging a little bit behind, but they're gaining speed, I would say. And therefore, our partners in the consortium, they all would like to enhance their SUMs, their sustainable urban mobility plans. And therefore, they would like to create synergies and to capitalize on existing projects, because we would like to exchange and share best practices, and we would like to enhance the currently existing knowledge bases. These knowledge bases are that we are tackling is MAS and CCAM, but our main focus for today is going to be UVAR. Furthermore, the partners which are for example Graz, Parma, Stuttgart, or Budapest, they're all basically champions in their own field and in their own country. So therefore, we would like to have some spillover effects so that these cities could become experts and enhance their role, and to discuss the opportunities that exist in these UVAR and some frameworks in their own countries, basically. We had a very good workshop about the update of the UVAR topic guide. The UVAR topic guide is this little nice brochure which you can find on the bottom right corner of the page. And we are going to have further workshops on MAS and CCAM. And the UVAR workshop, which was hosted by Polis, was very well attended. We had a very great interactive session, and the entire idea is to update the UVAR topic guide, which is already a year old, which doesn't really sound like much, but I mean, we all know what happened in the last just 9 months with COVID. And so there are lots of topics that we would like to update in an annex. And also we realized that we would like to create some cross-links with other projects, because we have seen in this very nice online whiteboard, as I would call it, which you can see over here, that projects like, for example, Reveal, but also in the future, UVARBOX and other UVAR-related projects have created great brochures or guides, or just a cornucopia, I would say, of documents which are available, but often they cannot be found. So in our annex that we would like to produce, we would like to also to cross-reference them a little and to give them a little bit of shine, that more people can access them. And the additional topics that we would like to address in our annex is going to be related to obviously COVID, but also to geographical and social areas and data collection and integration. The result, which I would like to share with you, is basically this semi-mind map, and we focused on the challenges and on the potential content that could be updated. Since we are all under a bit of a time constraint, I'm not going to discuss all the topics, but I would like to hint to a couple of them. So for example, as mentioned, we have a lot of expert groups, of which Polis, but also the other partners are already part of, for example, Reveal, but also all the experts and all the stakeholders which wrote the SUM guidelines. So therefore, we would give them the opportunity to work on that topic, but also we would like to share their work a little bit in these topic guides. A big new topic that is coming up is basically COVID. Of course, as I mentioned, this was not part of the original one, but we identified a lot of positive aspects, basically, of COVID, because it helped to integrate policy measures, as for example, sustainable urban mobility plans, but also the development of UVARs, because the streets were empty and the support of the citizens was growing, for example, for car-free cities, but also the opportunity to move around freely. But of course, the negative aspect of COVID is again that more and more people want to use private modes of transport like a car. And therefore, this is going to be a topic which is quite interesting to be addressed in such an update. And the social aspects are a very essential point, which have attendees during the workshop. And we would like to have to focus on the different best practices that are already existing on the accessibility of information data, but also the user friendliness of UVARs, for example. The UVARBOX project that Ivo is going to mention in a couple of minutes is basically one keystone of the user friendly of the accessibility, which would be really helpful, but also the geographical component of UVARs is something that we would like to explore and to see what options could be shared with the wider public. For example, the creation of a functional urban area. So which basically means that not only the area where the UVAR is geographically located, but also the connection with the hinterland and the discussion on what will happen if you create an UVAR at one geographical area and then all the traffic would shift to another one, and to have an integrated approach in entire regions. That's going to be very interesting and will be also an essential topic, hopefully, when we're going to update this guide. Coming back to that, basically our next steps is to collect content, and we would like to enhance our exchange with other projects and create references. Basically, so far as we can see, we're going to finalize the entire topic and the entire task in the first part of 2021. And basically, if you have ideas or if you have feedback or if you are interested in some news, some updates, you can always follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and also type in this a little bit difficult URL, but we will post this in the chat later. Thank you very much. I will give back to Ivo.
Okay, thank you, Niklas, for the concise presentation. Work in progress, as you can see, and indeed a call for action to join this process. If you have experiences in that area, please do contact the project. From a changing geographical scope with focus on Central Europe, we move to a changing purpose for our thematic scope of access regulations, with my colleague Giacomo Lozzi, who will talk about the specific activities on zero emission zones for urban freight logistics. There's a lot happening in that area, also given the target that the European Commission has set a decade ago to move towards zero emission or carbon neutral logistics in urban areas by 2030, and 2030 is getting quite close by now. So Giacomo, the floor is yours, and that also answers to a question I saw about where is zero emission zoning actually happening. So Giacomo, please go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Wait. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. This is a presentation not of a specific project, but of a work that we have been doing together with C40 and Transport Decarbonization Alliance, which are two other organizations of cities and companies working all over the world. So not only in Europe, and that's why this work is targeting cities all over the world. So we are working together, and we are almost finalizing a guideline on zero emission zones for freight. And so I will present very briefly the main messages and the structure of the document that will be available by the Polis conference in a couple of weeks. First of all, just a quick recap of what we do at Polis on freight. We have a urban freight working group, and we are involved with different partnerships. One is with Alice, which is the platform for logistics, working at European level, and we have a joint strategic partnership to pave the way for CO2-free city logistics by 2030. Then we are also part of the European Clean Trucking Alliance that includes around 20 leading companies focusing on creating demand and advancing for zero emission for freight. And we work on zero emission zones for freight, specifically within this collaboration, but also through other projects like Reveal, but also Assured. And we organized a series of web events on zero emission zones for freight last March and April that contributed to form the content of this guideline. So regarding this guideline, more than half of the world population lives in cities, and we saw during the pandemic as well how much is important that freight and goods reach the city centers, but also the surrounding. The freight sector contributes to different challenges, which are congestion, traffic safety, noise pollution, air pollution, and also greenhouse gas emission. So, but at the same time, freight is not the first sector that planners think about when they have to rationalize the movements in the cities. So, first of all, in this guidelines, we look at what is freight in a city. We want to give some information that facilitates the understanding of the phenomenon, because the freight sector is quite varied, and often the impacts of the different segments are different than perceived. For example, we have very visible movements of e-commerce and instant deliveries like Deliveroo, but we see that they cover a very small amount, at least so far, of the general emissions in this case, but also movements in general. In terms of emissions, although private cars in absolute terms have the biggest impact, we see that at the same time, vans and especially lorries, although they cover a small proportion of vehicles, smaller, they have quite huge impact that at the same time gives a good opportunity to address this specific sector, because the impact would be multiplied. So why to create a zero emission zone for freight? That's the purpose of the guidance. And they can make of course, a contribution for the urban environment, but also can make logistics more efficient. And moreover, developing zero emission zones also with an aligned approach among cities can give a strong message to producers to accelerate the mass production of zero emission freight vehicles. That it's one of the main issues in this sector. So why should you start with freight? This is what the guidance advise, and as I said before, a disproportionately large chunk of emissions come from the freight sector, though not in absolute terms. It's a relatively small amount of vehicles that can make a huge impact, so it's quite efficient to start with freight. It's completely different ball game in the sense that there are charging infrastructure related issues and different stakeholders that are not linked to the passenger sector. And at the same time, companies involved in the logistics operation need time to plan efficiently and to avoid disinvestment. So you need to involve them very early in the planning phase. Yeah, zero emission zones in general aim at promoting zero emission mobility, which doesn't mean only vehicle replacement, but also reducing freight traffic in general by increasing the efficiency, or choose the good mix of vehicles, for example, from trucks, but also shared services, cargo bikes, depending on the sector. So there's no one solution, but there are many compositions of the solution. And also then at the end of this process of efficiency definition, then you should try to change the trucks and vans that are left onto zero emission. So which are the steps of action that we identified? First, of course, it's important to build trust with stakeholders through the broad freight community and involve them since the beginning of the planning. Then you have to clarify the objectives as well as regulatory powers. What's the aim of the zero emission zones? Of course, reduce emissions, but also, for example, reallocate space. And we saw from Maria that there are many issues at stake in this sense regarding reorganization of space and access. And also, which are the regulatory powers, because in some cases it's up to the national governments to set the rules for access regulation. In other cases, it's a regional level, so you have to clarify this. Then set an ambitious and realistic target date and communicate it in advance. So, for example, in case of zero emission zones for freight that are about to start, many times the target is 2025, or for trucks 2030. Then develop an implementation strategy that has to be fitted with the local environment. Test and pilot your desired interventions, possibly in a living lab environment with some local stakeholders that are ambassadors and happy to test new solutions. And then, of course, implement, monitor, fine-tune, and enforce, which is very important, especially also from the freight sector. They would like to get the measures enforced once they shift to them. We also identified some success factors that accompany the introduction of zero emission zones for freight. We identified the alignment of policies across different levels of governments as a key. So aligning with the European national level, but also across different sectors. For example, the passenger one. Then creating incentives and other supporting measures that can help operators to shift and to accept the measures that you are implementing. Then develop a charging infrastructure for electric vehicles that is tailored for the freight sectors. We have a full study in the Assured project that is really looking at the different segments and realize that they are quite different from passenger cars. And of course, getting the necessary data to monitor and understand the evidences for adjusting and introducing the new measures. Just to conclude, in the guide, we will identify a few case studies. There are not so many, to be honest, on zero emission zones in general and specifically for freight, but we have identified 4 that we will discuss in the guideline. And yeah, we will include more and more once we know about them. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm here for questions and clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giacomo. So that gives a good overview of what's happening there. Just to summarize, the guideline, Giacomo, is when and where is it available?
Yeah. It will be published in a couple of weeks, and we will present it during the Polis conference. So we have a session on zero emission zones, and it's called Zero Emission Zone. Don't be afraid to start with freights. And we will introduce the session with the overview of the guideline.
Okay, very interesting. Also, that this is a global story. I think that's really interesting to see this movement across the world, and also that gives also vehicle manufacturers a specific perspective of change that they can plan for also in their production. Okay, you'll be around also for the Q&A later, and don't hesitate to post questions for those participating either in the Q&A or in the chat. Moving from the physical world of freight to the digital world of UVARBOX, I will quickly give a very short presentation, not to lose too much time, about the next topic. So we have heard from Maria that technologies are changing, that expectations of end users are changing also for access regulations. I had also mentioned at the start that the availability of machine readable information about access regulations is an important factor in the understanding of road users of access regulations, and with that understanding also the acceptance of access regulations. And that is why the European Commission has issued a tender upon the request of the European Parliament, actually, to solve that problem. The fact that information about UVARs are not easily accessible through digital tools, so it's not included in SatNav functionalities. And that also leads to the fact that people actually breach the rules of the access regulation, and there's a real issue with foreign drivers in that regard. There's also a lot of complaints that are directed to UVAR authorities, national authorities and European authorities about these issues, questioning the overall nature of access regulations in view of internal market, for instance. So the plan of our project UVARBOX is to digitize information on access regulations by providing cities the tools to easily bring that information into a machine-readable environment. I'm not going into the technical details, but the idea is that we provide tools that can convert analog information or written information easily into DATEX2 standardized data templates that are also going to comply with everything that's happening in the single digital gateway world. And for those who need to know, they understand what is in this slide. So the idea is that this should be beneficial for public authorities as well as for road users. For public authorities, they have the assurance that the information they provide will end up in the open data that is structured in the national access points for digital mobility data. It helps to be prepared for upcoming European Commission legislation with regards to real-time travel information. And it is also supporting a general movement happening in the European Union at the moment to digitize traffic regulations and also to digitize any information coming from local governments. And for road users, of course, they have the immediate benefit that they have an easier trip planning, that they can make informed decisions, but also that entire fleet management operations by logistic companies can benefit from understanding the characteristics of access regulations across Europe. So this should normally help a lot for everybody using urban road networks, also in a professional capacity. This project is gathering for the first time on the 24th of November for the outside world, where we will kick off the consultation of stakeholders. So if you want to join us together with the partners that you see on the slide, do have a look at the Polis website for that, and we'll be happy to take you on board for that meeting. 24 November, the start of the dialogue with stakeholders on this topic. So I will stop talking now, and I will give the floor to Matthieu Graindorge, because we were after having ventured to Central Europe, having ventured into the world of logistics, we are closing the session by talking about further digital tools to support access regulations. I have presented the unique or standardized way to digitize information about access regulations, but there's a lot happening in terms of vehicle management and access regulations. And in Reveal, the city of Helmond is looking at geofencing, and then also in a particular test demonstrating intelligent speed adaptation as part of a general policy of vehicle management in their city. So Matthieu, can you give a couple of thoughts about that process?
Actually, I will give only a few words of introduction, and then Stephen from V-TRON will give a proper presentation. So I just want to remind that overspeeding is one of the main factors of road fatalities and injuries in Europe, and the violation of speed limits remain very common, notably in city. And this is why Helmond has been quite active for years now, thanks to the support of Polis, also in the promotion of the deployment of ISA at the European level. Within the Reveal project, we wanted, among others, to have a concrete pilot to test the impact of intelligent speed adaptation in a district in cooperation with the company V-TRON. And so we aimed at assessing the impact of a gradual introduction of ISA vehicles in the traffic. And for this, we defined a route that was interesting with various speed limits, and with the school, because as I said, the safety around the school is something that is of interest for us. And we introduced in the traffic 10 ISA vehicles, and we organized speed measurement campaigns with 2 weeks of measurement, 1 week before the vehicles were introduced, and then during the experimentation, with a gradual penetration of 5% to 20% of the traffic. And now I let the floor to Stephen to speak more.
Yeah, thank you, Matthieu. And Stephen, you work for V-TRON, which is a technical manager of the pilot. We don't have a lot of time, so if you can summarize what has happened, and also how that supports the strategy of dissuasion of vehicles into a certain district, that would be also interesting to hear.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and we see the slides also. If you can move it into a presentation mode of the slides, that would be nice. Yep.
Yes. Okay. I'm Steven Herskamp from V-TRON, and I will explain a little bit about the technique we used in Helmond to test the ISA. That's the Intelligent Speed Assistance. First, to tell you a little bit about V-TRON, we are a company that develops in-car services. So we are an in-car service provider. We are based with our head office in Deventer in the Netherlands. We focus on aftermarket, so that means that we fit cars with aftermarket systems to help drivers while driving. So we assist them to make it safer and more comfortable for them. The pilot we did in Helmond is with our ISA system, which we developed. This works as the scheme explains. We have a speed model that's connected to a CAN bus limiter. And the speed model knows his speed by a vision model. So we scan road signs basically. When we know the road signs of a maximum speed, then we can limit the speed in the vehicle. We're also working on the digital map, so we can combine those two in the speed model. This means that you have a maximum speed from the road sign that's physically placed at the road, but we also have a digital map where we confirm that the speed is really there. We're working also on geofencing in the digital map, so we can, for example, place a geofence around schools with a lower speed during peak times. So this is basically the system that we used in this trial. I also have a little movie in the next slide that shows you the HMI in the vehicle. So this is really what the driver sees while driving over the pilot side. So we're coming around the corner and we're seeing a speed sign that will be there in a few seconds. The speed will pop up in the screen and show the driver that the maximum speed in this case is 70. When the speed sign is detected, the vehicle is limited to 70 kilometers an hour. So the vehicle cannot overspeed anymore. It's limited to 70. Okay, we have chosen the Volkswagen Up in the first case because it's a vehicle that doesn't have any ADAS systems on it. So this was a very basic car, and we improved it by adding ISA to it. After that, we chose to have another car that's a hybrid car and also had a few ADAS systems on it already, so driver assistance systems. And we combined our retrofit ISA system with the existing servers that were already in the car. So, for example, the adaptive cruise control is still working in this car, but you cannot overspeed the speed limit. So these are the two cars from V-TRON we used in this trial. And we went to Brandenvoort. That's an area in Helmond that's put in this picture. So there are several zones that Matthieu already explained. There's a 50 zone, a school zone, and a 30 zone. And we calculated how many cars we needed to place in the area to reach a penetration rate of 20% of ISA cars. We managed to do that in 1 week. So we had one day with 5% cars, one day with 10% cars, one day with 15% cars, and one day with 20% of ISA cars. So we tried to compare the number of ISA cars in those areas to see what the impact is for all traffic. We wanted to know if we can bring the speeds, the general speeds down, but also if we can get the peak speeds. For example, some cars are really overspeeding very, very excessively in this area. If we can get those out. So we tried to do that using 10 cars, so the 2 V-TRON cars and 8 Ford Focus cars, which has an OEM ISA system on board. And we also made a comparison between our system and the system from Ford. We measured speeds at 6 points in both directions. So at the route we chose, there are 6 radars installed. We measured 1 week without any ISA vehicles and 1 week with more and more ISA vehicles to see the difference. We're still processing the data, but it's looking very promising. At least we don't see a lot of peak speeds anymore. And the report is still being made, and we will present that later on. So this is the trial we did in Helmond, in Brandenvoort. For us, we want to do some next steps. So the digital map is now being implemented in our system. And with that, also the module for geofencing, as I explained. And we're looking to next year to a big trial in the Netherlands. And we are talking with a number of the Dutch provinces to do a big trial with them together. And we also have the possibility to install ISA in the BrainPod Smart Districts, which is an area in Helmond that's still built, and that needs to be in high-tech area in Helmond. And we're trying to equip all cars in that area. So this is the ISA system we used. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Steven. Gives a good overview of a specific pilot that is part of a bigger strategy to use technologies for dissuasion away from some certain zones, speed adaptation, but also green waves are also tested in Helmond to have some kind of soft nudging policies that could over time also be part of access regulation schemes in a way that they become ubiquitous for drivers and are less hard, let's say, than very clear, very hard limitations to enter a zone. And we have Maria, who also is posting a definitions framework in the Q&A or in the chat. I would like to ask all speakers to return to the camera so that we can see them. And I'm also looking for a final check in the questions, if there are any questions, because we're 1 hour in the webinar and we would like to stick somehow to the time. I don't see any further questions, so I mean, let me check, because there was a question about what an intelligent speed assistance system is, but I think that has been answered. We get compliments about the quality of the webinar as well. Thank you. So if there are no further questions, I would like to leave it at this. Thank you for all who has participated. Thank you also to the speakers. And as you can see, we tried in this webinar to show a variety of discussions that is at the moment happening surrounding the topic of access regulations, the richness of the topic also, and the focus areas that are shifting, the immediate deployment agenda of zero emission zones for urban freight needs to be mentioned specifically, because there's a lot happening there, and I think that will be a big issue in the next years. Don't forget the technologies that are entering the market to make this all happen. And to conclude, I would like to raise your attention for our next webinar, which will take place on Thursday at 2 o'clock, centered around Civitas activities around mobility as a service. And also, I would like to invite you to the Polis conference. We're meeting from the 30th of November to the 3rd of December, discussing, amongst others, also the zero emission zones that Giacomo has mentioned. And there's a super long session on access regulations, which will also feature reveal and other activities on the topic. So also to be recommended. And we're going virtual, so there's no excuse not to be there. Okay, thank to you all, and we'll meet soon. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you very much.